It is 7 o'clock, which means you're watching the only breakfast show live from Westminster. Today marks a year since the Prime Minister's first stay-at-home message, as the country was plunged into lockdown. But now, a warning that we'll be feeling the impact of coronavirus for at least a decade. Also this morning, reports that care workers will be required by law to have a COVID jag, and a talk of a hefty fine if we happen to venture abroad. Plenty then to discuss with the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, in just a few minutes' time. But also this morning, from the stage to the front line, we'll be speaking to the people who've changed careers to help the NHS over the last year in lockdown. And also on the show, we'll be chatting to this fantastic 11-year-old lad who spent the whole year camping in his back garden to raise money for his local hospice, all in memory of his next-door neighbour. That's coming your way at 9:45 on this Tuesday, the 23rd of March. 12 months like no other. A minute's silence at midday, candles on doorsteps, sombre ceremonies to mark 1 year since the first national lockdown. The Prime Minister calls for a day for reflection. The consequences of COVID, a warning that we could continue to feel the impact of the pandemic for a decade. Why taking off could land you in trouble. A £5,000 fine for anyone travelling abroad without a good excuse. A year she won't remember, one her parents will never forget. Sky News meets the lockdown baby who has only lived in the shadow of the pandemic. Supermarket shooting, a police officer among 10 people killed as a gunman opens fire in the US state of Colorado. Facing a vote of no confidence, Scotland's First Minister remains under pressure as a final report into the Alex Salmond inquiry is due to be published later today.
Some sunny spells for eastern parts today, but elsewhere rather cloudy with some rain heading in from the west, and that sets us up for an unsettled few days of weather.
Morning all. It has been 12 months since the Prime Minister's stay-at-home TV address to the nation. And Boris Johnson says the past year has been one of the most difficult in the country's history. Well, today, along with the charity Marie Curie, he's calling for a day of reflection, marked by a minute's silence at noon, along with candles on doorsteps at 8 p.m. But even with COVID cases and deaths continuing to decline, there's a warning that the social and economic impact from the pandemic could be with us for more than a decade to come. Sky's Laura Bundock has our first report.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
It was the speech that changed everything.
No Prime Minister wants to enact measures like this. I know the damage that this disruption is doing and will do to people's lives, to their businesses and to their jobs.
1 year ago, the country commanded into lockdown. It brought panic, eerie emptiness and deep personal grief.
He had a great sense of fun, he had a great sense of humour. He loved to sing songs and, I have real memories of him singing to them. It was lovely.
Rachel Pennant's dad, Cliff, died last April. He was in a care home and caught COVID.
I used to watch the news in the evening and I would see the numbers going up and I would always think I would take one off and think that one was my dad.
It has been an unimaginable year for us all. Care homes and hospitals found themselves in need with shortages of PPE.
3 of these words, no, all of...
Homes became schools and offices.
You have no authority here, Jackie Weaver. No authority at all.
As we all got to grips with remote working. And although distanced from each other, communities felt closer. But constant reminders too, no one was immune from COVID, not even the Prime Minister. 126,000 people have lost their lives. The numbers are still rising.
Relax your arm for me. Just relax.
But so is hope. The last year will affect us all for years to come.
the impacts of COVID-19 are going to play out over a much longer period. And this is because things like the social, the economic, and the cultural impacts will play out and cast a long shadow into the coming decade.
As we look back on the last year, a minute's silence at midday and candles on doorsteps.
Whatever our faith or philosophy may be, let us take a moment together to remember those who have been lost, to give thanks for their lives, and to acknowledge the inexpressible pain of parting.
It's a pain still being felt by many.
What I'll be doing is I'll be looking back, but I'll be trying to remember some of the hopeful things of the past year as well, because I think we're all looking forward to moving on. I will be remembering, but I will be remembering with hope too.
Laura Bundock, Sky News, Hoddesdon in Hertfordshire.
Very pleased to say the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, joins us once again on the programme. Mr Hancock, as always, good to see you.
Good morning.
A year on, good morning to you. A year on from the first lockdown, a day of reflection. I wonder how you'll be spending it.
Well, I'll be working mostly. I'll be working on the vaccine rollout and trying to get us out of this. That's what I spend all my waking hours on at the moment. I thought that was a very moving package that you've just shown, and I think a lot of people will be feeling the same as the emotions expressed in it, both by His Royal Highness, the Prince Charles, and also by the members of the public, explaining that this has been an incredibly difficult year, and probably the hardest year in a generation, and yet we all search for hope as well, don't we? And the hope is that we now have a route out of this, and that route is possible because of the wonders of science and the scale of the vaccination programme.
The wonders of science is a very good way of putting it. But on the vaccination route out of this, reports this morning that the government, that you in fact and the Prime Minister have agreed to a change in the law that would compel people working in care homes to have a vaccine. Is that accurate?
Well, no decisions have been taken. As you know, we have a task force looking at the question of certification, of whether there's things that you need to be able to show that you've had a vaccine or indeed a test in order to be able to do. That looks both at these questions around international travel, but is also looking at the question of whether, in order to be able to care for people professionally, then you ought to have protected yourself so that you can't infect others. This is something that happens already. For instance, doctors have to have the hepatitis B vaccine, and it's clearly something that has important moral questions on both sides. So it is something that we're looking at, but no decisions have yet been taken.
Important moral questions, important legal questions as well. I mean, you would presumably expect a decision such as this to be challenged in the court. So on that basis, are you currently looking at vaccination not simply of those who work in care homes, but perhaps mandatory vaccination for, as you put it just a moment ago, people working in care, people caring, which could generally apply to quite a lot of people in the health service as well?
Well, as I say, this already is the case in terms of hepatitis B in the NHS for doctors. So there is a clear precedent for this proposition. At the moment, what we're looking at is for those who work in care homes, elderly care homes, on the grounds that they are the most vulnerable to this disease. That's why they were in the very first cohort of the groups to be vaccinated. It's something that some care homes have actually called for, because it would require a change in the law through secondary legislation, and therefore I entirely understand why some care homes, wanting to take that duty of care over those who are in that home for the residents, are keen for us to be able to take this step, so that they can require people who could otherwise pass on the virus to take the vaccine.
There is, of course, a kind of a fairly big question that follows all of this, that if we are actively considering mandatory vaccination if you want to work in a care setting, could we consider mandatory vaccination more generally in the population at large? I mean, the JCVI modelling showed us, I think it was at the tail end of last week, the ideal percentage targets for vaccination. And we're looking at 75% coverage in under 50s when we get to that stage. That is a big target. Now, if we're not coming close to that target, are there circumstances in which you could see mandatory vaccination for people under the age of 50?
No, we've ruled that out for the general population. And there's a difference, which is if you as a profession care for people and are therefore in very close contact with them, then that is different to the general population. On these percentages, they are important. The uptake amongst the groups that we're vaccinating is unbelievably high, over 95% now in the most elderly groups. And for care home workers, where it is a bit lower, it is now greater than 3/4 in elderly care homes amongst staff who've been vaccinated. Amongst residents, it's over 90%. So these take-up rates are really,
sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt. We've got so much to get through, and I think the point in terms of vaccination in care homes has been made. But there will be people looking at the rate of progress that we are making in terms of vaccinations and wondering why the government is bringing forward, fines of £5,000 for people who head abroad without good excuse. I mean, it does seem that the government this morning is basically saying, look, until at the very earliest July, summer is cancelled if you're looking to go abroad at the very least.
No, I think it's quite important to clear this one up. The questions of whether people will be able to travel abroad this summer are going to be addressed by the Global Travel Task Force, which is reporting around the 12th of April, so middle of next month. The roadmap sets out that the earliest date by which we will allow for international travel without one of the clear excuses, reasons that you need now, is the 17th of May. That has not changed. The way we're putting that into law is as part of these roadmap regulations that will be voted on Thursday, and they come to an end as a whole at the end of June, but that doesn't change the timings for these questions on international travel. Now, having said all of that, it is now too early to know where the Global Travel Task Force will come out and know what the decision will be for the 17th of May. And the reason for that is that we are seeing this third wave rising in some parts of Europe. And we're also seeing new variants. And it is very important that we protect the progress that we've been able to make here in the UK, where we have now
from the Prime Minister yesterday. I mean, he was talking about a third wave, developing in Europe and washing up on our shores. When a wave hits our European friends, he said, it ends up on our shores. It seems a slightly strange way of talking about it, given that this third wave, if you want to call it that, in Europe emerged, not far from where I'm standing, in Kent. We exported it to the European Union.
Well, it shows what an international challenge this is, and what we have to do is all work as much as we can together. But it also shows why we're being cautious on international travel, because we've seen these waves come before. We saw the first and then the second, and they both ended up here.
But we've beefed up our borders. The action that you took most recently on our borders was, in your own words, to prevent new variants from arriving here and to prevent cases coming to the United Kingdom. Why should we be worried in any way about a third wave happening on the continent, given the changes that you've made?
Well, we should be concerned because we have seen the impact before. And the question that you
the system.
We did, absolutely. But we also have a desire, if possible, if it's safe to do so, to open up international travel. Of course, I understand people want a summer holiday abroad if it's safe, and we've got to make that decision on whether it's safe. and we'll do that according to the timetable that's set out in the roadmap. Now, the good news is that thankfully we have this very significant vaccine rollout here. Mm-hmm. We've got, yesterday we saw the 30 millionth vaccine overall, both first and second doses combined. And this vaccine program is clearly saving lives here, but we need to make sure that we protect that rollout from the concerns that might come from new variants, and we need to work on understanding more about
Minister, if you're wanting to take credit for the vaccination programme, and I understand when you do, then you have to, at some point, accept some of the criticism that is laid at the door. We are a year on from the first lockdown, and according to the Johns Hopkins tracking, we are 5th in total deaths, 6th in deaths per 100,000, 6th in deaths per population. Why has that happened? Why, in terms of mortality, compared to other countries, have we done so poorly?
Well, that's a very important question, and it's one that it'll be the right time to assess that in the future. But now the right task is to spend all of our energies on
so can you explain why?
This virus.
We are a year on. We are on, according to you, the third wave might be on its way here. When is the appropriate time? If things go badly, we could still be in this same time next year. If things go catastrophically, we could still be in this in some form. At which point you could again say, look, we're still in the middle of it. We're still dealing with it. Exactly. You've been in charge of our pandemic response. You personally must have an idea why we are 6th in the world in deaths per capita.
Well, I think the point that you make is an important one, because it's trying to get this country out of this pandemic. That is what I spend all of my time on. And vital and central to that task is constantly to learn about what has worked well and what we need to do better and differently. And we've done that throughout this crisis.
The appropriate forum for that presumably would be an independent inquiry. And I'm not going to waste your time or mine by asking for you to promise that one will be set up straight away. But perhaps on today of all days, you could reiterate, in fact, the promise that the Prime Minister made in July of last year, that there will be a full inquiry as soon as possible.
Yes, I think of course, the Prime Minister has set out that there needs to be all of these questions, and I think that's totally reasonable, not least because we need permanently to be ready for another pandemic. That is a fact of life, and it's something that we need to be prepared for, and we need to make sure that all of the learnings and all of the scientific improvements we've been talking about are understood, and that we are properly ready. Mm-hmm. But what we need to do right now is learn those lessons in practice to make sure that the actions that we take now are guided by our best understanding of this virus and our best understanding of the pandemic, and we've done that throughout. That has led to the roadmap with its cautious, but I very much hope irreversible timetable. We get people saying, can't you go faster? And can't you open up international travel, more easily? And also some people saying, can't you go slower? But I think the general bulk of the population, most people think that this is at about the right pace. And the scientists, the best science, thinks that this is at about the right pace. But we'll keep monitoring the data to make sure that it's safe to take each step. And that's at the core. That builds on learning, as much as we can. And trying to make the very best judgments in what are very difficult circumstances.
They are very difficult circumstances indeed. We do need to let you go, Minister. Very conscious of the time that you need to spend with other interviews this morning. So thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Tom Rayner was, of course, listening to the Health Secretary this morning. Morning, Tom. Just in terms of that which we were hearing latterly, look, I mean, I think from the Health Secretary, I think that's as far as I've actually heard him go in terms of answering the big question: why, in terms of total deaths, why, in terms of deaths per capita, have we done so badly? He accepts that this is a question that needs answering.
Yes, he does. But what he didn't do is say when that question should be answered. And, of course, that's something that the opposition are pushing hard for, to have a public inquiry, to have a date set in so that lessons can be learned. But there was, yes, you're right, an acknowledgement that there is a question to be answered, and, you know, no doubt that forms part of the reflections that will go on today, 12 months in. But I thought two other things stood out, Neil, in that interview. First, on this question of whether or not care home workers will be required to be vaccinated. Matt Hancock said there was no decisions taken yet, despite reports in this morning's newspapers that such decisions had been endorsed by him and the Prime Minister. But he did say that there is a task force looking at the question of certification. Now, this is really important because the government have been very keen to avoid the idea of vaccine passports, but they have been keen to suggest that there might be some form of certificate which could either prove a vaccine or a negative test. An indication there, I think, that is what we potentially are going to be looking at in the care home setting. And one final point, Neil, about the issue of global travel. Reports today that the changes in health regulations would put back the possibility of international travel. Well, they do in terms of the legal regulations, but Matt Hancock insisting that wouldn't necessarily impact the dates in the roadmap, which say that it could be as early as May the 17th.
Tom, thanks very much indeed. And we will have special coverage of that 1 minute silence to remember those who died during the pandemic. That's here on Sky News from midday. And a little later, Dermot Murnaghan is going to be hosting a 2-hour special programme looking back on a year that no one could have imagined, but is now the norm. That's COVID crisis, 1 year on, at 7 o'clock tonight. But let's bring you the latest monthly data for employment and economic activity now. Sky's business correspondent Helen Ann Smith is in the newsroom with all the details. How's it looking, Helen?
Morning. Well, the unemployment figures up until this month are actually very slightly improved on what they were last month. So we get a total now from the Office for National Statistics for the number of people who are no longer on the payroll since the beginning of the pandemic. And that's ever so slightly down. 693,000 fewer people are on the payroll now than they were pre-pandemic. That's roughly just under 70,000 fewer than we saw last month. Similar trend too in the unemployment rate. The 3 months last quarter, it stood at 5.1%. This quarter down to 5%. So small fractional improvements. One detail that's worth pointing out, the ONS have done some analysis about who are losing these jobs, and they've actually found that it's the under 25s that are really adversely, particularly affected by all this. 60% of that big number were people under the age of 25. Now, you might ask that given the fact we're in a big lockdown, why these figures are slightly improving. It might reflect growing confidence because of the vaccine. It might reflect the fact that businesses are adapting slightly. And of course, it reflects again the fact that that furlough scheme, the support schemes, are continuing. They're going to go up until September. We may see a little more unemployment once they're over, but for now, they're really keeping some of those cracks plastered over.
Helen Ann, thank you. Now, 10 people, including a police officer, have been killed after a gunman opened fire in a supermarket in the US state of Colorado. Authorities confirmed a suspect was detained and that there is no ongoing threat to the public. Sky's US correspondent Greg Milam has the detail.
We have multiple calls coming from inside of people that have barricaded themselves inside. 2-4 shooter is inside. He just shot at us twice.
The calls started just after lunchtime. A man with a rifle at a supermarket, and what America's seen so many times before, happening all over again. The mass shooting this time at the King's Super in Boulder in Colorado. More victims of America's epidemic of gun violence. Outside, there was a massive police response. Many of those who were inside ran for their lives.
We just kept going. We just ran, and there was somebody laying in the road, and I tried to run
towards him, and Nicholas pulled me away and he said, we have to go. And we just ran and hid behind the buildings on the end over here.
As the news cameras caught customers being guided to safety by police, they also captured the suspected gunman being led away. An apparent injury to his leg. There is no word yet on any motivation for the shooting. Among those who died was police officer Eric Talley. He'd been the first to arrive on the scene.
My heart goes out to the victims of this incident. And I'm grateful for the police officers that responded. And I am so sorry about the loss of Officer Talley.
Many who were inside the supermarket had come for COVID vaccinations at its pharmacy. The pandemic may have replaced news of mass shootings on the screens of Americans, but like so many places, Colorado has seen its share of gun violence. To Columbine High School and the cinema in Aurora, we now add this, to a depressing roll call of murder that this country, for all the talk of gun control, is unwilling or unable to confront. Greg Milam, Sky News.
Let's take a look at a few of the other stories making the news this morning. And a final report into how the Scottish Government mishandled complaints against the former First Minister, Alex Salmond, will be released later this morning. The findings from MSPs on the Harassment Complaints Committee comes a day after the First Minister was cleared of breaching the ministerial code. That report described some aspects of Nicola Sturgeon's behaviour as regrettable, even naive, but concluded that she had not misled Parliament. Germany is extending its lockdown until April the 18th, and the public are advised to stay at home for 5 days over the Easter holidays to try to break a third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. German authorities also agreed on a blanket requirement for travellers to be tested for COVID-19 before boarding a flight to Germany. NHS England says using dexamethasone to treat coronavirus patients may have saved 1 million lives around the world. The steroid was found to reduce COVID-related deaths 9 months ago, following a clinical trial at Oxford University. Around 22,000 deaths are said to have been prevented with its use in the UK alone. New figures show that only half of GP appointments are now conducted face-to-face. It's been warned that the move to video and phone consults and booking appointments online means that some people are unable to access care. A seal living in the River Thames has had to be put down after being attacked by a dog. It had been named Freddie Mercury and had become hugely popular with residents of Hammersmith in West London, entertaining people on the banks of the river. But after being taken to South Essex Wildlife Hospital, he died after sustaining broken bones in the attack. Now, while today marks 1 year since the UK first entered lockdown, for Jamie Burr, it is also her daughter Flora's first birthday. On March 17th last year, Janie was admitted to hospital while pregnant, suspected of having COVID-19, but was discharged with a negative test. Just 6 days later, though, she was back in hospital celebrating Flora's birth, while the Prime Minister announced a national lockdown. Sky's Becky Johnson has been meeting the family.
Flora's our original lockdown baby. She was March the 23rd. Who knew that that was what was going to happen? Her being born and us going into lockdown.
Still in hospital with her newborn daughter just hours old, Janie heard the news.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
As they introduced Flora to her brothers and the weeks went by, little did they know she'd reach her first birthday with normal life still yet to resume.
What a year. What a year for everyone. What a year, like, for Flora, for families, for everyone who's been working so hard, like people who've died, people who've lost people. What an absolute crazy year.
For Flora's parents, the silver lining of lockdown has been the time they've had at home in Oxford together as a family. But as an intensive care nurse, Janie decided to cut her maternity leave short to help her colleagues in London who were under enormous pressure during the second wave of the virus.
It was really hard work, and it was really hard saying goodbye to the kids for a couple of three nights each week. But it was also, just something that I felt like I needed to do at the time.
At home, it's been a year of highs and lows. What? Meetings with grandparents have been fleeting.
Let's give her a glass of water.
And there are so many family and friends who've missed out on precious moments during Flora's first year.
It took a long time for her to actually meet them, and then she hasn't really seen much more of them. So that is sad. And Pete has really borne the brunt of it working from home.
Right, see if you can climb up again.
Like so many parents, Pete has had to learn quickly how to balance work and family life.
Here we go.
Spending a year at home has been a challenge.
Not much space to have 3 kids milling around all the time, so lots of calls with Albie on my knee or other children on my knee.
Here she goes.
12 months on from the first lockdown, there is now hope, at least, that the end is in sight. And for Flora, it's onwards and upwards. After a year she won't remember, but her parents will never forget. Becky Johnson, Sky News in Oxford.
Brilliant wee story, that. Let's bring in Isabel to see how the weather is looking today. Morning, Is. We were talking about it yesterday, that pass by the International Space Station over the UK. Clear skies in London last night. It was absolutely stunning. We've got a few more days where we might be able to see it in the evenings. How are the skies looking?
The weather's changing, Neil, so very different, actually. A lot more cloud in the sky. And not to say there won't be some breaks, because we've got quite a sort of mobile weather pattern, fronts coming from west to east. So in between, hopefully some clearer skies, not just for the southeast, but for other parts as well. So I'll keep you updated, but let's take a look at the big picture.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So we had high pressure yesterday across the southeast. Temperatures reached 15 degrees in London, 16 Celsius actually in Aberdeen yesterday, and there was some really quite nice sunshine. The high that's been giving the dry weather, though, is gradually slipping away into the near continent. It's allowing fronts to come in from the northwest. Changes are underway. In fact, there's fairly extensive cloud cover across many western areas today, with strengthening winds, and rain will be gradually pushing in from the west across Ireland and eventually into Northern Ireland and western Scotland this afternoon. Other areas hopefully seeing some sunny breaks. I should think the best in the southeast. Eastern Scotland also favoured quite well. Temperatures in the sunnier spots up to about 14 or 15. But the cloud extensive tonight across central and southern areas with a little bit of drizzly rain. And then tomorrow, showers pack into the north.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Isabel, thank you. The UK marks a year since the first lockdown today, with a minute's silence and candles on doorsteps. Earlier on the programme, Matt Hancock said it had been one of the hardest years in a generation. I asked the Health Secretary why the country had one of the worst COVID death rates per capita anywhere in the world.
That's a very important question, and it's one that it'll be the right time to assess that in the future. I think the point that you make is an important one, because it's trying to get this country out of this pandemic. That is what I spend all of my time on. And vital and central to that task is constantly to learn about what has worked well and what we need to do better and differently.
The Health Secretary there. Let's speak once again to Callum Semple, Professor of Outbreak Medicine at the University of Liverpool and a member of SAGE and NERVTAG, that group which provides ministers and officials with evidence-based scientific advice. Professor, great to see you this morning. A year on from the first moments of lockdown, what would you have done differently in those early stages?
Well, as you know, we're not speaking here about policy commentary. That's a given for an interview like this. But in my personal capacity, the things that I reflect on, which and I wasn't a member of SAGE right at the start, I didn't really appreciate how infectious this virus was. That was one aspect which I'll put my hands up and I got wrong. The virus undoubtedly is infectious in close quarters by respiratory aerosol and droplet in close quarters, and that's one of the aspects that I certainly didn't get right.
Why was that? I mean, there was, of course, everyone was struggling to get to grips with, you know, of course, a novel coronavirus, but it was we were looking abroad at places like Italy. We were looking at hospitals filling up. There were any number of scientific questions, but we were, in essence, at least in the early stages, we were flailing around a little bit in the darkness, waiting for that empirical evidence.
Yes, it's incredibly difficult. I think what as society we didn't appreciate, and what as a wider group of society wider group of scientists we didn't appreciate, was that the virus was going to move into the country essentially through British people returning from holidays in Italy, Spain, and France. The assumption was that it would be more traditional long-distance foreign travellers coming back in that would bring the virus in, and we really hadn't predicted that it was going to be the surge of our own people coming back. And I think that's what would have made it very difficult had there been a decision to go into an earlier lockdown. What would you have done with the 20,000 British tourists out doing skiing and having holidays at that time? You couldn't have left them out there. And there simply wasn't the concept of quarantine that would have been acceptable on such a massive scale at that point. Even quarantining a small number of people coming off the cruise ships was quite a logistical challenge at that point. Society just wasn't really ready for that.
As you said before, Professor, of course, you're not here to defend policy decisions taken by the government. That's not your job. But it is a curious one. I just wonder, from a personal perspective, as someone who wasn't involved in SAGE in the early days, is now one of those who's providing advice, how difficult is it for someone like you, who is a scientist, who views things in perhaps in purely scientific terms, when we're dealing with a pandemic where there is this intersection between, you know, economic effects and health effects? It must be quite strange to be operating in these circumstances.
It is. We do bring best science as far as we can, where the evidence exists, to committees. But all of us are fathers and brothers or sisters, and we've all been living this as well. So it's not that we work in complete isolation from the reality of the clinical environment or the social environment or the effect it's having on our friends and families. So there is certainly a human element. There is a degree of common sense in what we're doing. So it's not just a purely ethereal scientific process that's going on here.
No, of course, of course. Just one final question, Professor. We are seeing the Kent variant, B117, running rampant in parts of Europe. Certainly looks to be taking control in the United States. Given that it emerged here, given that there must be some kind of latent resistance in the population, how concerned should we be about, as the Prime Minister put it, you know, the wave of a third wave, while the effects washing up on our shores?
Well, first of all, the good news is that the current vaccines all cover the Kent variant very well. The concern at present is that in countries where there's less vaccination and a very strong third wave at the moment, that's the perfect breeding ground for further variants of concern. So at this point, Britain, I feel, has got its act together. The concern is, as this third wave is going on elsewhere, that'll generate new variations. But even within Britain, there is a likelihood of a third wave in potentially July, August time, when we do unlock society. But that third wave we would expect to occur in people that are less susceptible to very severe disease. But it's inevitable. As we unlock, there will be a rise in cases. But the key here is, have we won the race to vaccinate the most vulnerable members of society so that we can keep society open this time and get the economy back on the road?
Well, one way or another, we will find out in the not-too-distant future. Professor Callum Semple, great to see you again. Thanks for joining us. Now, change of tack. Authorities in Australia have issued more flood warnings and evacuation orders after a severe deluge forced more than 18,000 people to leave their homes. Officials in New South Wales fear the situation will worsen in the coming days as the heavy rain continues to fall. David Richardson reports.
Paul Luckman moved from Liverpool to sunny Australia 8 years ago with his family. Now everything he owns is underwater.
It's probably gone up about 150 mil inside the house. From the backyard to the house is probably about 3 to 4 metres, and that come up in 24 hours.
His street has flooded before because it backs onto a small creek. He never expected it to become a giant lake.
Well, you watched it growing as you were moving the furniture out. So yes, it was, let's get it out real quick. It did slow. We had time to get everything out and lock it up and sandbag it.
9 days of constant rain, and it shows no sign of stopping. More than 18,000 people have been forced to leave their homes, and more are set to follow. What you're seeing here is just a tiny fraction of all the land that is now underwater in Australia. We're now looking at an area that is being hit by this flood that is almost twice the size of the United Kingdom. Road after road linking small riverside villages are closed, making rescue attempts virtually impossible. Evacuations are being conducted by a string of rescue craft nicknamed Archangels and helicopters winching people to safety. Residents here have never faced this before.
I've never seen anything like this, and I've been speaking to people here for days who've lived in this community for decades. No one's seen it quite like this, and it's not likely to go away fast.
Oh no.
In this area, the Hawkesbury Shire, an hour west of Sydney, this flood is a 1 in 60-year event. Across the rest of New South Wales, a 1 in 100-year disaster. 10 million Australians across 38 disaster zones are living with some form of weather warning. And it was only a year ago they faced the scourge of bushfires. That scorched earth only making these floods so much worse. David Richardson, Sky News, Sydney, Australia.
And just a reminder that Sky News is launching the first daily primetime news programme dedicated to climate change. You can watch the Daily Climate Show every weekday at 6:30 in the evening. That's from Wednesday, the 7th of April. New statistics from the UK's fertility regulator shows that fertility treatment is less effective in people from ethnic minority backgrounds. Black patients were found to have the lowest chance of success. Well, let's bring in Dr. Christine Ikechi, a consultant obstetrician and gynaecologist, to get her expertise. Doctor, great to have you on the programme this morning. Can we generalise in any way as to why we are seeing such significantly different rates of success in terms of the fertilisation strategy?
I think it's very hard to. There are some pieces of information that we do have. So, for example, we know that Black women in particular are more likely to start IVF treatment at a later age compared to the rest of the population. We know that Black women who are seeking either a donor egg or a donor sperm have less options. So only 3% of the donor eggs and 3% of the donor sperms come from a Black donor. We also know that Black women are 3 times more likely to have a condition called fibroids that will impact on their fertility, as well as having tubal damage. But it's much more complicated than that. We're also aware of maybe some cultural stigma that will prevent some women from seeking help at an earlier age. And overall, we need to remember that Black women, particularly, unfortunately, suffer inequalities in their health outcomes throughout their life course. This is just one iteration of that.
Yeah, just on that point, Doctor, there was a recent piece of research talking about the experiences of Black women, not in terms of fertility, but kind of the other end of the process when giving birth and the advice they were given. And plenty of anecdotal evidence suggesting that Black women were not being presented with a full range of treatment options, were being treated differently by doctors. I mean, is there potential for that to be having an effect, the way in which Black women are treated by medical professionals, for that to be having an effect on fertility?
I think we have to see it in the wider context of the differences that Black, in particular, women, but also Asian and women from other ethnic minority backgrounds experience whenever they are seeking healthcare, whether it is at a much younger age, so in adolescence, if they are seeking help with fertility, or indeed when they are pregnant. What is particularly sad about this specific statistic is that for a group of women, they may not get pregnant at all and may not have the joy of starting a family if they wish to do so. And so this is incredibly distressing for so many women and indeed their partners out there.
Doctor, if I give you 20 seconds to speak directly to Black, Asian, minority ethnic women who are experiencing problems with fertility, what advice would you give them?
The first thing is to seek help early and to get the information early. I, as part of the Royal College of Obstetricians and the HFEA, are now completely committed to engaging with grassroots organisations and with women to give the information that they need, because essentially information is power. So get it early.
Dr. Christine Akechi, great to have you on the programme this morning. Thanks very much for being with us. Still to come on Breakfast at this hour, we'll be hearing from the Shadow Cabinet Minister, Rachel Reeves, for Labour's view 1 year on from the first lockdown.
It's actually one of the most fascinating things that the more I looked into it, the more I could see that it really, really wasn't some Western greeting. In fact, chimps shake hands. It's quite cute. Sometimes they actually shake feet, and they have very, very similar meanings. Dr. Kat Hobater, who's a primatologist, did an incredible study where she showed that they shake hands and it has a very similar meaning. So even after a fight, they'll often shake hands to make up, which is so very human as well, isn't it? And there are uncontacted tribes. So imagine people who have never met the outside world. They know what a handshake is. So on first contact, a number of uncontacted tribes in New Guinea knew instinctively what a handshake was. They'd already been doing them. So it turns out the handshake is probably not just cultural, it's probably biological, it's probably in our DNA, especially if the chimps are also doing it, because of course they're our closest relatives. So actually the handshake is kind of, it's not going anywhere as far as I'm concerned. I think it's one of the things in our repertoire. I think one of the things that we hate to think of as humans is that we're animals, but actually we are animals. We haven't evolved our way out of being animals. And communication, chemically, communication via touch is still incredibly important. It's not just about language. But, you know, thank God we do have language, because it means we've got that to fall back on and we're not just out in the plains kind of just relying on those things. But there are some incredible studies that show how important handshakes are. There's this thing called chemo signals, so chemical signals. There are these incredible experiments where they put gauze under people's armpits. They got them to watch sad films or happy films, and they actually took that gauze to a different group of people, and the people were accurately reflecting the emotion on their faces. And they actually were able to show that when you shake hands, you're more likely to touch your face unconsciously afterwards and take a sniff. And so it turns out we really are animals. And that handshake is completely functional. I know it's kind of early in the morning, but I think it's gross. I know we think it's gross, but it's not actually that weird. If you think about it, quite a few of us accept that sexual chemo signals, pheromones, exist. So why wouldn't other kinds of chemical signals exist as well?
Did you know that air pollution isn't just bad for the environment, it's bad for our health too?
I think more limited sunshine today. The best of the sunshine will be in the southeast, but for many there'll be a good deal of cloud around. A freshening breeze as well will bring in some rain to western coasts and hills. Most persistent wet weather though coming in across Ireland this afternoon. You can see that band of rain eventually reaching western Scotland later on. Now, because the winds pick up, that should help with air pollution, keeping it low for most places, maybe just moderate near some busy roads or in urban centres.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Welcome back. We are hoping to speak to Rachel Reeves, Labour's Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, in just a couple of minutes' time. Labour, of course, have been pushing for that independent inquiry into well, the year that we have had since the first lockdown was announced. You've just had a little bit of Isabel Lang. Why don't we have a double dose whilst we wait for Ms Reeves? Joining us from the news. Well, go on, you take it away. You can tell us anything you like about the weather whilst we wait for Rachel.
Friday looks very different, Neil. I mean, goodness, when we're out and about on Friday, quite a wind chill and cold enough air to bring some heavy snow to the mountains of northern Britain as well. That's Friday. Let's take a look at today, though.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Not too bad for many today in that there'll be a lot of dry weather. There will be some sunshine around as well, particularly in the east. But we'll start to see changes from the west as the front comes in. That'll bring in some rain, strong winds too for the north and west. And then that rain will tend to fizzle as it moves its way southwards across us during tomorrow. But today, at least some sunny breaks developing after a bit of a murky start. I should think quite optimistic for a while across the southeast before it clouds over later. Eastern Scotland, another favourite spot for some sunny spells. Otherwise, as I said, mostly dry, mostly cloudy for today, with the exception being Ireland and then later Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, with rain to end the day there, with quite a strong wind as well. And that rain gradually topples its way down into more central and southern parts by around tomorrow morning.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
In the whirlwind of the early days of the pandemic, many expected lockdown to cause just a few weeks of disruption. For residents in One Cheshire Street, outdoor, socially distanced fitness classes, well, they were the way to pass the time and get through the ordeal. From Frodsham, our North of England correspondent Tom Parmenter sent this report.
There was no manual for how to deal with a pandemic. Last March, a virus was about to invade all of our lives, and nobody really knew what to do.
Huge amount of shock, really. I think we were all quite stunned when we were first told to stay at home. The street dancing and coming out with neighbours helped to shield us from the reality. There was a lot of dreadful stuff going on outside that bubble. I've been to 3 funerals personally, and I think certainly two of those we've decided that we'll come back and meet together as a family in happier times.
There were the walks that we never knew were there. Emma's dad was one of the first to catch COVID.
Literally any control that you thought you'd have in a hospital situation or anything like that before, suddenly there was no rules anymore that sort of fit with, expectations of what was happening. He was on the severe shielding side of things as well. So how somebody with a quarter of a lung has come through this and survived it and lived to tell the tale, I will never know.
Last week, Joanna swapped Frodsham for Venice. They've become very good at passing the time.
Yeah, it has become quite a bit of a... Addictive, yeah.
But they've missed their daughter Claire, who is profoundly disabled. She's not spoken in 43 years, and they've only been allowed a few visits to her specialist accommodation.
It's a bit hit and miss with the Zoom. Initially she didn't know whether it was on the ceiling or whether it was coming through the door. She could hear my voice, but she didn't know where the voice was coming from. So it has been difficult.
The Andersons have never spent so much time together. Homeschooling is thankfully over, but home working will stay.
It's almost like the new topic of conversation is, have you had your job yet? You know, for people my age now, have you had your job yet? No, when are you getting it? All right. It's just completely incredible how things that were completely alien a year ago were all just part of your daily life now.
This has changed people and what they want from their lives.
I want a simple life after this. I have lots of things I would not want to go back to doing.
People have realised that it's people that matter.
I think it brings out the best of the British people. We always hear the negative sides, but we don't often hear the positives.
Nobody has the same story, but we've all shared what's happened. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Frodsham in Cheshire.
Well, a year on from the beginning of the start of first lockdown. Let's once again talk to Tom. I mean, the question is, of course, if not now for a public inquiry, then when? There's so many questions about why we have such a death rate.
Yeah, and the Labour Party have been asking for that for some time, but they are really pushing that point today because ministers are talking about the need to reflect on 12 months that has touched absolutely everybody. As you heard in that report there is nobody who has not been affected by this, some far worse than others. Keir Starmer today will be asking Boris Johnson to set a date for that inquiry. And as you heard from Matt Hancock earlier this hour, they're not prepared to give one.
Tom, many thanks indeed. Stay where you are. Come back for the top of the 8 o'clock when we will have much more a year on from the start of lockdown.